Welcome back, Dolphins fans. Today we're going to be discussing something that I think really we need to understand what went wrong with this team. And honestly, studying what happened and transpired over the years, it's just this team, basically the coach, every single person on this team outsmarted themselves. So the basis of this, and we'll go into each person that I think everyone wants to go into. Tua will say for last. But the first person, and honestly someone that really either needs to go or needs to give someone else the ability to tell him who to get and what to get. But honestly, I just think he needs to go, is Chris Greer. And the reason behind that is because when you build a team, here's what you need to do. You draft players well, and you make sure you lock them up if they turn. So the basis of drafting a player, which when you look at what Chris Greer did, the basis of drafting a player is you draft a player in the hopes that they will turn out to be a good player. So every single player that Chris Greer has drafted that turned out to be a good player, most of them he let go to free agency. And we got to take a look back at this because we'll talk about Robert Hunt and Christian Wilkins this year. But you look back to everyone, Laramie Tunsil turned out to be a good draft pick. He traded that away, and I understand it was a rebuild. Christian Wilkins, he let free agency hit, left. Robert Hunt, left. All of the good players, Minka Fitzpatrick, left. All of the players that you drafted that were first-round picks that were hits, most of them you let go to free agency. And, again, Javon Holland is going to hit free agency. Here's the thing. When you drafted Christian Wilkins, you saw that he was turning out to be a very good player, very good defensive tackle in the league. The reason that Christian Wilkins left in free agency is not because he asked for a lot of money. It's because you kept pushing back paying him for years. And that's what eventually happened, where you pushed back paying for the guy. Because in the beginning, when Christian Wilkins was first trying to ask for an extension, it was not going to be $120 million. It was probably going to be around like 80 or 90. So instead of signing him when you knew you probably should have, you waited and you waited because you wanted to see something different. You wanted to see that he wasn't going to turn out to be a good defensive tackle, or he wasn't going to be a great one. So this is why Chris Greer, he needs to go. And he's the biggest problem with this team, is because what you should have done, will correlate Christian Wilkins and Robert Hunt, is you see that they're playing well. Christian Wilkins was becoming one of the better D tackles in the NFL. You sign him to the contract that you need to sign him for because you drafted a player. He turned out to be good. You keep that player. You retain that player because that's the point of drafting. That's how you build a good team. You draft players and you keep them on your roster. Robert Hunt. So for the first 3 years of Robert Hunt's career, for the most part, he was probably the best offensive lineman that we had on this team. And of course, I understand he went in free agency for 100 and whatever million. But the reason behind that is because, again, you didn't look at him and go, hey, we need to retain our offensive lineman, just like you did Austin Jackson, where you put him to an extension. We're going to let him hit free agency. Instead of signing that player to probably what would have been $60 million contract, maybe $70 million contract, you let him hit free agency, and of course people are going to throw money at him. So that's the thing with Chris Greer, and that's why, honestly, I think we all understand that this dude needs to go, is because you outsmarted yourself every single time. So what you end up doing is you end up getting stupid free agents that don't turn out to be anything, and even when you do hit on those free agents, you don't sign them back. Andrew Van Ginkel's another one. You drafted a player, third round, turns out to be pretty good. You let him hit free agency. I understand the coaches are there, but at the end of the day, as a general manager, in order to form a good culture of your team, you draft players, they turn out to be good, you retain those players so you can build off of it. So the philosophy for Chris Greer is to go into free agency and bargain binge and try and find star players in the league in free agency that are older veterans, bring them in and let your young players hit the market. This is the stupidest ideology that you can think of in your life, and this is why this Dolphins team is the way it is. Instead of re-signing or putting an extension on Robert Hunt, when you start seeing he's turning into something, you then, no offense, but you sign Teron Armstead, who is an injury-prone veteran that's older in age. Instead of trying to draft receivers that stay, you then hit, and I understand Tyreek Hill is great, but at the end of the day, paying $100 million for Tyreek Hill, we definitely maybe should have thought of building an offensive line around Tua. That should have been the philosophy, and drafting wide receivers to match that, because there were plenty of wide receivers coming out in different drafts. Because what we're seeing right now, love Tyreek Hill, great player, but he's not big enough or tall enough to be really that number one receiver. So whenever we play good teams, he kind of disappears because he can't. He's 5'10". I understand he's super fast, but a lot of these big time receivers, the reason why Joe Burrow and all them are up there, and even Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, they have these bigger wide receivers that sometimes you just throw the ball up to them and they can get it. That's why Jonnu Smith was so good this year. And I'm not saying that Chris Greer doesn't bring in good free agents, but the philosophy is just wrong. You draft young players and you retain them, and then you supplement in free agency. But what Chris Greer actually did is he built the team in free agency and bargain binged with his draft picks. So you sign Austin Jackson because he's cheaper, Robert Sealer because he's cheaper, which I get these things. But then you pay all this money to all these free agents like, Jalen Ramsey and Tyreek Hill and Jordan Poyer and all of these other free agents that we should have drafted. Bradley Chubb, these should have been players that if you want a correct rebuild, you build it through the offensive line and the defensive line and through your draft picks, and then you supplement in free agency. That's why Dan Campbell is so good, because he built this team through draft picks. And the free agent was basically Jared Goff. That was essentially what he got. He traded for Jared Goff because you wanted a younger guy. He built young. He did everything so that the young players could develop. And Chris Greer, he completely did the opposite. Got aging veterans and then let all of his draft picks hit the free agent market. If you sit there and sign Robert Hunt to an extension in his second-ish year or third year, you sign him to extension because Robert Hunt, clearly all of us saw Robert Hunt was turning into being a good, really good, if not one of the better offensive guards in the league. If you sign him to an extension, he's locked in like that. You don't have to sign him for $120 million. Christian Wilkins, the first 2 years he was looking for a contract because he was turning out great. If you sign him to a contract, he doesn't hit the market. Boom, you've locked up that. Then you have Christian Wilkins with Zach Sealer, Robert Hunt with Austin Jackson. And then you have either Connor Williams or Aaron Brewer, whatever the two is. And again, Patrick Paul right now is the same similar issue where he's turning out to be good. If he turns out to be a good left tackle, you sign him to an extension immediately. You don't let him hit the free agent market. That's how you build the culture. Again, with the Tyreek Hill thing, guy's great. But what we ended up doing is we built this team around no offensive line and small receivers, and this is why Tua fails. This is essentially why Tua, and we'll get to that in a second, but Chris Greer's philosophy is just wrong, and that's why you need to get a different general manager. I haven't seen one coach that hasn't tried to build the offensive line and defensive line and know exactly when and who to pay, because paying the wide receivers and all of those skilled position players is great, but you need to build the trenches first. Mike McDaniel. So the problem with Mike McDaniel, which again I think it trickles down from the Chris Greer thing, is again he outsmarts himself. Where the play call, he can't dumb it down to make it just a simpler type of game. You see that perfectly when you look at, there was a screen in this game against the Houston Texans where Tua looked to his left, faked to Waddle, and then threw it back across the field to Devon Achane, who then got tackled for 1 yard. But when you look at this play, Waddle was wide open. Like he had probably 10 yards of space. This is the epitome of the Mike McDaniel offense, where the guy just outsmarts himself left and right instead of just playing good football. And of course, not building the offensive line completely destroyed this type of offense, because if you look at Kyle Shanahan, the big difference between Mike McDaniel's offense and Kyle Shanahan's offense is Kyle Shanahan has offensive linemen. He's continually tried to build with offensive linemen, whereas Mike McDaniel just doesn't have any offensive linemen. He has Liam Eichenberg. He has Robert Hunt playing guard, which these guys are not starting caliber players. Teron Armstead, which luckily Patrick Paul turned out to be pretty decent, but is always injured. And then, Austin Jackson is basically one of your better offensive linemen. And we see the effect it was when Austin Jackson went out, because now he can't run the ball. You don't have a solid offensive line. You never have. And I don't know, as a coach, I just feel as though maybe you should have said something the second year when you realized that you were getting bum rushed every time you played a good team because your offensive line couldn't hold up. So Mike McDaniel also has a lot to do with the blame here, and it's just because he outsmarts himself. He thinks he's smarter than everybody in the room. In reality, he's kind of just an idiot, and he continues to try and do this super extravagant offense that doesn't work. And instead of dumbing it down and trying to make it different, because he's had years to do that, you just think by adding one other skill position piece that it's going to fix everything. And it doesn't. And I don't know if Mike McDaniel goes, but it's tough, man, because his offense is just, it's like that nerdy kid that just doesn't seem to get to be physical ever, that he doesn't seem to get to being a man. Like, you gotta, I mean, me personally, I just think we need Vrabel. I don't think we keep Mike McDaniel. He doesn't seem to get it. So he's been the biggest problem. And now we'll talk about Tua. So Tua Tagovailoa, do I think he's an elite quarterback? I think he has elite traits. I do not think he's elite quarterback because there's only two of those in the league, Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, because these players, you can give them anything and they will do something with it. These are the elite players. They will do what they need to do. They have the dog in them, all of that stuff. I don't put Lamar Jackson because I think if you make tight coverage against his receivers, he can't make those throws. He needs them to be almost wide open. So, Tua. I honestly think the problem with Tua is that dog just hasn't been in him for a little while. I don't know where it's been, and I think he thinks he needs to run into people in order to get that out of himself, but I don't think he does. And number two, again, trickling down from Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel, is they never got him an offensive line, and they give him the shortest receivers to throw the ball to. This is why Jonnu Smith is getting so many targets, because Tua has not had someone that is over 5'10" in a while. Do I think Jalen Waddle's great? 100%. Do I think Tyreek Hill is great? Yeah. But the problem is that sometimes you need someone with a catch radius to kind of bail you out. And the perfect instance, that Tua does not have a strong arm. It's clear as day now. Like, Tua just doesn't have a strong arm. He can't get the ball out there. And sometimes you need your receivers to bail you out. Tyreek Hill's not going to do that. Jalen Waddle's not going to do that. You need someone like a Jamar Chase or like a T. Higgins or one of these types or an A.J. Brown or one of these guys that can just bail you out sometimes. And that's the problem with Tua right now. He has no offensive line, and you're asking him to do too much. Again, he's not an elite quarterback. He's a very accurate passer that will get the ball out quick. So, what you should have done is build on the offensive line, get him bigger receivers, and allow him to be able to process the defense. And that's where, again, the problem really isn't Tua, and I don't think we move on from Tua. I think you move on from the general manager and the head coach, because all that Tua really needs is a good offensive line, and he can diagnose teams and all that stuff. It's just when you hurry him up and you speed up the thing in his brain, that's when he starts panicking and he doesn't realize what to do. Again, he's like a Drew Brees. You got to consider he's like a Drew Brees, he's like a Tom Brady, he's like a Peyton Manning. When you sped these guys up, that's when they did not play well. Tua's the same thing, but Drew Brees always had a very good offensive line. Same with Tom Brady, same with Peyton Manning. That's what you need to do for this kid. You get him a very good offensive line because he's athletic, but he doesn't need to be. He's very accurate. You pinpoint the strengths that this kid has. Instead of trying to make him this elite guy, you pinpoint the strengths. If this guy has time, he can throw the ball all over the field. But he is rushed on all of these good teams. Every single good team he plays, he's rushed, and then he starts panicking, and then he starts throwing bad passes. But if you allow him to be able to process the defense, he doesn't have that problem. So think of this. If you had Aaron Brewer, Robert Hunt, Austin Jackson, whatever left tackle and guard, and he had like 4 seconds to throw, he would not panic. That seems to be the issue with him. He has 1 second to throw, so he panics. Because, again, he's not an elite quarterback. He's a very good one that's very accurate. He's not elite. So when you get someone to start panicking, his main trait, the accuracy, which is like feet of difference. Like it's not, him being this accurate is, if he panics a little bit, the ball's going to move a foot to the left or the right. And that's either going to be an interception or an amazing throw. That's the point here, is that you get him his offensive line and run game and bigger receivers so that he doesn't panic in these games. And he will start doing what he needs to do. You don't need an elite quarterback. You just need someone that's accurate, anticipation, and does his thing. And that's what he'll do if you get him what he needs. Me personally, I say, and I know people are going to be crazy, I'll make a video on this. You trade Tyreek Hill, you let Jalen Waddle take over on number 2. Either you draft a receiver or an offensive lineman in this draft. You draft him and you trade Tyreek Hill away for whatever you can get for him, because you need to start developing bigger wide receivers, bigger offensive line, and allow Tua to just get the ball out of his hands and not have this trickery type of offense. You allow him to just pinpoint, go through his reads every time. You make it the easiest that you possibly can. That's what a head coach is supposed to do and a general manager. You make it the easiest for your quarterback. They just have not done that. And that's why Tua has this happen every single game that he plays against good teams, because he starts panicking because he doesn't have time. And then that's when the accuracy, when it would be an extremely good throw, turns into an interception or a terrible pass. That's what went wrong with the Miami Dolphins this year. And again, like I said, general manager, head coach, I would say, and we'll make a video about this, Vrabel, and then get somebody from the Kansas City Chiefs or somebody that knows how to draft and develop players and bring them in as a general manager so that you make Tua's life easier, because you don't need another quarterback. You just need to make his life as easy as possible so that he can just do what he needs to do. Fins up, baby. Love you all. Peace.